What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. The 53-man roster officially dropped. Cuts are in. We've seen all of the early moves and plays by this franchise, and I want to dive in and give you guys my reaction and thought process to what I've seen here. And on one hand of the coin, I feel like there is a lot of surprise, but on the other hand, it's not necessarily the most far-fetched thing with some of these moves that have taken place. I think a lot of us have become attached to players that were able to excel with bad teams that still would have probably been lower to mid-tier depth players on a lot of other teams, and we've kind of taken that for granted with a lot of the turnover that we've had and hoping that they become kind of favorites to this new coaching staff as well. But let me know what your reactions are. I'm going to show you guys what the current depth chart looks like, posted up on the New York Jets website as we talk about the offense, defense, special teams here. And you'll see where a lot of the holes are, and maybe some of the thought process will start to come in play here. But let's just kick things off with a few of the IR placements, right? Because I think this is a point of clarity as I kind of look through the depth chart, in addition to some of the players that may have been waived and cut and what may have went into some decisions. So Byron Cowart was placed on IR, Jamarcus Weston on IR. We know Irvin Charles was already there. Gus Hartwig previous there, Chris Boyd recently, and then Jarius Monroe was there as well. And so when I look at this, Cowart, Weston, Monroe, these look like player-saving moves. You put them on IR, you get to carry them into the season, I am pretty sure, right? And then you figure out how you want to adjust and move rosters or whatever as health pictures become a little bit more clear for this organization. Byron Cowart makes a ton of sense because at one point we thought well enough of him that we were going to make him the partner to Quinnen Williams, and I think we all have the belief that Harrison Phillips is going to assume and take over that role, and when Byron Cowart comes in, he's going to fall in place in that immediate second string line, probably with J. Tufele as the 1-2 combo when Quinnen and Phillips is gone, and or the immediate stand-ins. Jamarcus Weston, he's a special teams guy that it feels like Chris Bancho really didn't want to let go of. Again, flying down the field, able to go and make the tackles that are there for him. And who knows, maybe there's a world where he does develop enough of a defensive acumen to crack the field at some point. And between the training camp docu-series that we're seeing and watching him with the linebacker group more often, even though he was initially listed at defensive end and stuff like that, I think it's not far-fetched to think that maybe he can replace that Zaire Barnes type role or something and play very, very minimal snaps, but still have a way to contribute on special teams and defense. And then Jarius Monroe was a guy that we just seen, I don't even want to say explode because that might be a bit of an over-exaggeration, but he popped every time we seen him on preseason, and he ended up finishing and trying to wrap up the end of last year, if I'm remembering correctly, doing pretty well there as well. If not, I might just be remembering off-season stuff. But nonetheless, Jarius Monroe definitely had the needle pointing up, and seeing him fight back from injury over the course of that last preseason game as well and still be able to make plays before things just mounted and piled up too much was a lasting memory for me as a guy that definitely fits that mold of resilience, and he wants to be out there by any and all means necessary. And the fact that he still was making plays with what looked like leg cramps and or some kind of significant enough bruise or strain was pretty huge to me. Now, offensively, let's talk about it. In the quarterback room, we end up cutting Adrian Martinez and Brady Cook. I think it's a bit of a surprise because we all don't feel safe, especially on the news of Tyrod Taylor having his knee scope. We already knew he had the injury-prone label coming in, and so I think there's this measure of, yes, you think highly of him as a backup quarterback. He can come in, he can run the offense effectively. He may even run it better than Justin Fields in some degree when it comes to his ability to know when to be aggressive and to actually have a very successful deep ball. Not only one that can get there, but also that defense are going to be able to respect, because more often than not, whoever's on the receiving end has a pretty good shot of it being a good ball for them. So I expect one of these two guys to return. Now the trick is going to be, how are they playing this? Is this game day call-ups that they plan on doing and trying to maximize and strategically use the 3 that they're going to be allotted? Or is this a situation where they think there may be a better QB3 out there and they want to use one of these two guys, Adrian Martinez or Brady Cook, as the practice squad developmental guy for the year? There are some interesting names out there. There's even been some trades suggested, like Tanner McKee, for example, but we'll have to see what the game plan is going to be here. I can't imagine that you're going to just play it safe and say we're comfortable with Tyrod Taylor being that next guy up, just based on what's transpired this offseason. In the running back department, we let go of Donovan Edwards, Lawrence Toafili. Now, I'm not totally surprised by this at all. Donovan Edwards was a guy I really thought highly of, and I absolutely love him, and I think it's a pretty fair shot that we end up losing him on waivers, which sucks, but I think ultimately both of these guys are just victims of the numbers game. You have established guys ahead of you and name value guys in Brees, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, and then Kenny Anangwu is the special teams value, which is going to be a little bit more valuable than having someone that might see 1 to 3 or 4 snaps over the course of a game, if you even decide to carry 4 on game day. So it would have kind of been a disservice to someone that's maybe expecting to play, because you are talking about this rush heavy attack, and you imagine maybe even if there's some nicks or bruises or not, maybe they carry 4 just to kind of lighten the workload for everybody a little bit more, make it maybe more defined in terms of game plans and stuff like that. But ultimately it kind of feels like that was far-fetched. And while I think Donovan Edwards also has some of that home threat ability, I would even argue Lawrence. And if not, then definitely the explosiveness was there from the both of them. Kenny Anangwu, for sure. He's that certified guy that's going to go 0 to 100 and try to hit something long every time. But just seeing the wow factor that he brings in that return unit is going to be something that we find vitally important. And we'll double back to this when we talk about special teams, because his placement there happens to be odd to me, even though we aren't looking at the official depth chart. Wide receiver, probably more of the surprise, right? Malachi Corley, one of the bigger names. Demir Miller, my Rutgers guy. Jamal Pritchett, which is probably the biggest one, because he had arguably the most successful preseason and or offseason out of any of these wide receivers on this list. And only one thing comes to mind about why he would be cut. Even though he was making a ton of plays, it was blatantly clear to me that the quarterbacks essentially had to be pinpoint accurate, because it was hard to really throw him open if guys weren't meeting him or placing the ball exactly where he was going to be at. He just didn't have the arm length or the size to really go out there and make those particular plays. But seeing him be used in motion, seeing what he can do, being used horizontally or stretching the fields or being out in the flats, or even when they just actually asked him to go out there and run routes, he seemed to be effective in a variety of different roles. So he's another guy that I fear we could lose out to on waivers. If not, it would probably only be because other teams, the other 6 ahead of us, also have size concerns, or actually even the other teams subject to pick behind us, right? But I'm hoping he clears waivers. If so, that'll be a huge get for our practice squad as a ready-made return weapon for us, and a guy with some upside. And I think many of us still feel like he beat out Xavier Gibson over the offseason, but this also goes to show we don't know everything. We're living off of the, keep in mind, very minimal details that we get over a handful of practices. In the grand scheme, let's say if they have 25 practices that are out there, the media probably gets to cover somewhere between 5 to 8, and other than that, we're just getting bits and pieces. And even what they can divvy up to us, there's restrictions on what they can share and all this kind of stuff. So we don't know the true essence of the totality of all these things and what it looked like in addition to the preseason games. But sucks either way. Quentin Skinner is going to be one of those other names, along with Brandon Smith, that you kind of feel a bit shocked about. And then Ontarie Wilson made a couple big plays, not really expected to make the roster in my opinion. It feels like when you look at who's left over for this depth chart, the staff chose to go veteran heavy here, which maybe makes a little bit more sense. You don't want to add, so with Justin Fields, you already plan on taking some pressure away by implementing a heavy usage of run plays, right? Then you build into the fact that you can even minimize that further by doing one read style plays. You already are also going to have the RPOs, 3 5-step drops, take a look, get it out, or use the legs, right? So there's a whole idea, just very simplistically speaking, about how you can minimize how much Justin Fields has to process, take in. Even play action might be something that's a little bit less used in terms of having his back turned to the defense, because that also is going to have to speed up the processing, or at least the read and react ability he's going to have to go to. But if you have the veterans in there, it makes his job a little bit more easier, because now you don't necessarily have to also coach up these young guys while trying to figure out what the defense is doing and why the coach is calling certain plays and how to react and respond, when to be aggressive, when you can maybe take your foot off the gas, etc. All of that gets lightened up by having guys that are out there, know the job, know the role, solid understanding of the playbook, and even more so, they can come back into the huddle and tell you what they're consistently seeing, whether it's trends, whether it's repetitive situations that are occurring, or whether it's just how they are consistently beating their guy in the type of routes that they feel like they can win on. And generally speaking, a younger guy probably isn't going to be able to highlight those things to the degree that a veteran is going to be able to. So I'm not mad at it per se, but it definitely felt like there was an opportunity to at least sneak 1 or 2 more of these higher upside guys on. But considering Corley at least is off the roster, I'm going to consider it a plus here. Tight end room, no surprises. Neil Johnson, Zach Kuntz get the cut. I assume one of these guys may come back. If not, there may be still even further changes to this tight end room. I think you're going to look strongly at if Jeremy Rucker does stay on this roster. And Aaron Glenn has at least highlighted he feels like there's a lot of meat on the bones. There's a lot more that he can go out there and do in terms of playmaking, even though we haven't seen it. Andrew Beck is going to be the guy that essentially assumes the tight end 2 role in terms of the blocking plus guy. He can go out there and make all the things happen for the run schemes they want to do, but also will catch some guys, as we've seen in preseason, off when it comes to that check down or hot route option for Justin Fields. Jeremy Ruckert is going to essentially be an understudy to him, and then you have Stone Smart as the main receiving weapon next to Mason Taylor whenever they happen to be aligned or whenever he's filling in for Mason Taylor. On the offensive line, it sucks. I talked about Carter Warren as a potential trade candidate per what we saw from Jeremy Fowler. Leander Wiggins should return, and I guess you can't immediately just move this guy to the practice squad as your IPP designated player, but assuming not, the hope is he passes waivers and then we get him back on the squad. He's not going to take up one of our 16 positional units since they have a special designation, and we get to continue to develop and see what we can do with him. Cole Lavau is really the only other sad one here. Maybe Liam Fornadell as the other UFL guy that came in with at least a good reputation and pedigree from that UFL XFL league. So we'll see if any of these guys really return. But the interior depth is lacking a little bit more than I would have expected. I thought that maybe we prioritize a little bit more guard depth in terms of just having that 11th body out of there, since we're only carrying 10 linemen. But I think you're going to see some combination of Newman, Tippmann, and Myers playing musical chairs once and if some kind of injury creeps up. And there's a number of ways you could play it. Tippmann can play left or right guard based on what we saw this year in rookie season. Myers, I don't believe he's had guard depth. I can't remember how this worked out in terms of his playing experience history, but I assume he just flows in as the immediate center. And then you have Newman, who's also going to be that, I guess, technically second string two-way guard, potentially. But we'll see, right? I think ultimately it's as strong as an offensive line unit in totality as you can possibly get. But it feels like we may be able to go out there and maybe bump up the skill level just a little bit, right? I think Marquise Hayes being picked over someone like Leander Weigand or Colavallis or Liam Fornadell, for example, maybe a slight shocker, but again, I'm not going to nitpick over here. I think Steve Hyden has a great unit on his hands to be able to work with and hopefully rewrite some history for us. When we switch over to the defensive side of things, I think things were a lot more clear here. You look at the defensive line, I think the minor surprise is maybe that we decided to cut Eric Watts and we ended up keeping Rashad Weaver, who I thought at some point was on IR, and I don't remember him necessarily ever being taken off. And maybe if he wasn't, it was just that we kind of shut him down for a little bit and he wasn't practicing. But again, outside of OTAs, it's been rare to hear his name be called doing something positive. So again, as mentioned before, maybe in the totality of practices, he's shown a little bit more than someone like Eric Watts did, but another prime practice squad returnee. Other cuts, Michael Fletcher, Kingsley Jonathan, Fatorma Moba, and Peyton Page are the upside developmental guys. Maybe it was less necessary to keep them, of course, with our recent defensive tackle trades, but also someone that you still want to keep in-house that you can develop in if Briggs turns to not work out, or Harrison Phillips doesn't end up reworking his contract and stuff like that. Whatever the situation is, you have some internal depth that's already going to be acclimated with the environment, playbook, etc., and something that you can use to build off of as a base. Interior moves still, we'll see what happens. I think there's some room to play with, right? Based on the depth chart you have, and I can't see it right now, by the way, with how I'm looking at it, or it's going to interfere with the video, but you have, I think it was Quinnen, you have Jay Tufele behind him, and then you have Leonard Taylor, and we have some of the new guys and stuff missing as well. But we'll see what happens here. I wouldn't be surprised if there's tweaks either way. I think more people expect us to look heavily at edge more so than anything at defensive tackle. But I think the team is maybe more comfortable with the skill talent at the edge position more so than anything they have on the interior. So we'll see there. Linebacker unit, Jamin Davis, not necessarily a huge surprise to me. I know he did well when he replaced McCrary Ball, for example, and overall, a lot of people are still buying in, if you will, to that first round pedigree. Too soon, too little, too late, I guess, is the name of the game here. Jamin Davis, Jackson Sermon, Aaron Smith, aka Boog, all ended up being cut. Looks like we just ended up prioritizing McCrary Ball and a lot of the plays that he was making consistently over cap. Also, I guess the minor head scratcher, if you want to have the Jamin Davis conversation, is why Zaire Barnes, another guy that felt like we really rarely ever heard his name. I think he had a decent, solid game against the Eagles, if I'm recalling the last time I consistently seen him out there on the field. But there wasn't anything that necessarily wowed me in terms of how he read and reacted, how he triggered downhill, how he just covered space, how he locked in on QBIs and coverage. Like, nothing really that stood out, but that's why you can argue he's the fifth linebacker in here, right? So, for what it's worth, going to the defensive back room, not necessarily any surprises, but I think there's just some moves that kind of hurt the heart a little bit. Jarek Bernard-Converse, Dean Clark, Jordan Clark, Ryan Cooper, Mario Goodrich, Tanner McAllister, Jerry Von Rowe, they all get the boot. And while I personally don't think there's any shockers here, JBC was a guy that did have pretty strong coverage grades going up to the Eagles game, and I don't know if that trend continued or not, but standout preseason last year. This year, a numbers game, right? I think if you look at that cornerback room, you can pretty much just nod your head and say, okay, I can see why. And he'd be a guy that, again, I would love to see return. But considering that there wasn't trade chatter around a lot of these players or anything like that, it just feels like a situation where you're seeing a lot of these mid to lower tier depth guys, kind of like I talked about in the beginning, that are going to be floating around out there on the waiver wire. And it's just going to be a situation where, are we looking for a familiar name? Are we looking for more of a physical trait? Are we looking for maybe more of a developmental guy? What's it going to be? Maybe things were a little bit too up in the air in terms of positional versatility for JBC, and they prefer to just work with the guys that they have on hand. Jarris Monroe, again, my other guy that I really, really like, and I definitely hope that he returns. But considering he's on IR, I think we should be safe with however we want to, tinker around with the roster here. Also, don't forget, it's the initial roster. We're going to see about 6 other versions of this team before we kick things off against the Steelers. So I'm just curious about what the strategy, what is going to be the approach when it comes to waiver wires. Are there going to be a ton of moves, or are there going to be very few moves? Will we prioritize trades? Are we going to prioritize traits, athleticism? What is it ultimately going to look like here? And then just switching to special teams real quick. Harrison Mevis, really the only notable name that necessarily applies to this unit. We ended up deciding to roll with the folk hero. I don't think anybody's going to be mad at that move if you believe he can still capture that Titans glory with being one of the most accurate kickers in the league over the last couple of years. Now, the Kenny Anangwu conversation I want to pull back up here because for some reason we have Xavier Gipson locked in, or not locked in, again, this unofficial depth chart, but we have him as the primary kick returner and punt returner. And I listened to my boy New York Jets situation report, and he had on Dom C, and Dom C was quoting something. I think someone in the comments mentioned that Michael Nania from Jets X Factor dropped, which indicated like the last 6 or 7 punt and or kick returns that he had, and just absolutely how atrocious it was. And for anybody that likes Xavier Gibbs, I would say one, he has a personality that would make it hard for someone to want to move on from him, I would imagine, right? Very endearing guy, seems very humble. Everything indicates that he has a strong work ethic, and you really just want to buy into him, right? But when you look at the statistics, when you look at the facts of the game, and when you look at the limitations, again, based on size with him as well, it just doesn't paint a great picture. And so the returner being his main bread and butter, he hasn't succeeded there since that Bills overtime touchdown that really kind of cemented his early legacy, and then he's been living off of that, in my opinion, ever since. Hasn't done much of anything as a receiver, and so really kind of brings a head-scratching decision as to why Jamal Pritchett didn't win the job. And the only thing I can imagine is that, right, maybe Sean Jefferson, again, Aaron Glenn, I prioritize that veteran experience. He's already been in the league a couple of years. Maybe he had a better rapport with Justin Fields if he happened to have anything close to some first string type snaps with the unit. So we'll ultimately see. The world will never know, right? But Kenny Anangwu not being the primary kick returner over him and being labeled as the backup punt returner, a bit of a shocker there. I would expect that'll change, but we'll see what happens. Let me know what your guys' thoughts were. Again, though, love seeing all of the ton of different reactions from all of the different content creators. There's some very intriguing theories and thought processes that are out there, so please make sure you share yours in the comments as well, and I'll catch you guys again. Peace.